You ever get over to New Jersey, Nash?
Not if I can help it.
You talk funny, Nash. Where are you from?
Lots of different places.
Hello, friends. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to the Strange and Beautiful Book Club. We don't really have any news to cover today because the movie that we said we were going to watch, we actually got to watch because it was streaming.
All right, Highlander. We watched it on Amazon, and we're pretty sure it's the director's cut.
We watched the 117-minute long version.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I'm pretty sure it's the director's cut.
yeah, I found a couple versions, either 116 minutes or 117 minutes. It was probably right on the edge of that. And that's the director's cut.
Well, the director's cut includes the flashback where he saves the little girl from the Nazis.
Oh,
So
I
if
thought that
there's-
was in the original.
No.
All right. Starting off on my notes. Rachel browses for the movie.
Ooh, starting at the very beginning.
Before the beginning.
It's a flashback, if you will, which this movie was full of.
A flashback of the podcast. All right. Queen intro.
Obviously.
Obviously.
I don't know that this movie is this movie without Queen.
More movies should have a complete Queen soundtrack.
This movie is not this movie without Queen. Without Queen, this movie is fucking ridiculous.
Right.
It's ridiculous. The only thing that makes this movie as 80s magic as this movie is the phenomenal soundtrack by Queen. Hands down.
The scene that Rachel mentioned as part of the director's cut. You cut back to Nazi Germany. MacLeod is saving this little girl, Rachel. He gets shot. She says, "Oh, you didn't die."
Hey,
What?
It's a kind of magic.
It's a Kind of Magic is the title of the Queen album for this soundtrack because Queen was really excited about the movie. They were supposed to do like one song for the movie. And after they watched the movie, they were like, no. We're going to do the whole movie soundtrack. So they did. But
The movie
they were
bombed.
skeptical about how
The
well the
movie
movie
bombed.
would perform.
Yeah.
The movie bombed. So instead of releasing it as the Highlander soundtrack, they released it as Queen.
It's a kind
It's
of
a Kind of Magic.
Yes.
Which comes from that director's cut scene, which was cut from the theatrical version. All right. So we enter Madison Square Garden.
Mm-hmm.
Did MacLeod/Nash just routinely go to professional wrestling matches
Maybe it was an
at
effort.
Madison Square Garden?
Maybe it was an effort to keep up with the times. I mean, he got nothing else to do. He's immortal. He has sworn off relationships. He's literally got nothing to do with his time. Yeah, you go watch a wrestling movie. Plus, we're trying to highlight violence in this scene.
Right. And
So-
I labeled this as a brave intro scene.
Right. So the best way to highlight, to sort of immediately, bang, set the tone for this movie as the kind of violent movie it's going to be, is to start out with this wrestling scene.
Zoom in on Madison Square Garden pro wrestling match. Camera pans out to the nosebleeds. Spotlight on Christopher Lambert. These are the eyes of a hunted man. As the camera zooms in on him, we flash back.
And he does have a very specific spotlight. Like he is spotlit. So that you immediately pick him out in this scene.
Yes, it's very dark. There's a spotlight on his face.
He has like the $5 seats. The ones that are so far you don't even know what wrestlers are fighting. He's way, way up and like far away from.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as he's staring off into the distance, this is a hallmark of the Highlander series in general. Distant glazed over stare, fade into flashback. Arbitrary historical period.
Yes. And
this one happens to be his origin story.
I do love the flip-flop transitions we get in this scene, where we get the violent crowd watching the wrestling and the violent wrestlers themselves. And then we get the immediate flip-flop to the Klansmen marching over the field to like dramatic. Obviously, they're heading to war. So we get the immediate flip-flop between past and present. And I always liked that.
Right.
Like rapid-fire transition that they do in this scene.
Yeah. Connor McLeod is wandering through this battle, wondering why everyone keeps running away from him. No one's going to fight him.
Are we there yet? I don't think we're there yet.
That's this scene. Oh, you're right. I jumped ahead.
Don't fuck with me on Highlander. I know this movie, god damn it.
Okay. So we cut to him kind of getting ready for battle. And then we return back to Madison Square Garden, and he gets up, walks away. We're not sure why, but it may be related to the fact that when he walks into the parking deck, a very bland-looking white man
Named Fasil,
who's supposed to be Middle Eastern.
Polish national.
Oh, Polish.
Yeah.
Well, and he's Polish right now, but the name Fasil Iman, I think.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's supposed to translate to something very straightforward, as like, and
he's got sunglasses on. He's mysterious. I don't know. We can just leave this to mystery.
80s cars, sneakers.
Scene. I love your impressions of this scene. He steps on a Coke can, which I always thought was really interesting. He's stepping and he stops because he stepped on a Coke can, and he finishes smashing the Coke can, and then he continues walking.
He's getting his adversary's attention.
Is he
drawing him out,
or is it just?
No, it's. This is my interpretation of it. Is he knows there's someone there. So he makes a very distinctive noise to draw out his opponent.
I always thought of it as a callback to the fact that he's in modern times. It's like a grounding thing.
Yeah. I guess it is the Coke can under the very 80s sneaker.
These are some banging kicks. These Nikes he's sporting here.
Yeah.
It's a look because he's got Nikes. He's got tight light wash jeans. He's got a long khaki rain jacket.
Yes, the like
belted tightly at the waist.
Okay. So he's got in this scene he has the khaki trench coat.
Yes.
With acid wash jeans and white Nike sneakers.
Yeah.
And then later we have a brown bomber jacket with acid wash jeans and white Nikes.
All of which he's somehow storing his sword in at any given moment.
Even the bomber jacket.
Even the bomber.
He whoosh,
I love this movie.
sword comes out.
I
Okay.
just love
Anyway.
this movie.
Generic white guy shows up named Facile.
Established.
They sword fight. My notes are backflips, degraded concrete as the sword digs into the concrete pillar of the parking deck. And then we have the quickening.
One thing I feel we are remiss in noting here, which I hate to throw us into the rewind machine, but think of this as a Highlander flashback, is I don't think I noticed the first, I don't know how many times I've watched this movie, that the wrestlers are wearing sparkly sequined Confederate flags.
One of them is.
Yes. Yeah. And I thought, this is one of several scenes in this movie that have not aged well. And these wrestlers wearing the Confederate flag has not aged well. And there's also a lot going on in this fight scene. I do love your snapshot impressions of this fight scene. But this is interesting. First, when they first meet, McLeod says,
Fazil. Wait.
So we get the idea that he's not down for this fight.
Right. McLeod, like his mentor, McLeod seems like his whole, I guess, position on the, like, immortal, there can be only one thing is, dude, we're immortal. Why are we trying to kill each other? Let's just leave each other be.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So we definitely get the impression immediately that he knows him because he knows his name.
Yes, they're
and
familiar with each
he's
other.
not interested in killing him, but this man attacks him anyway. So this is a hard open for this movie because we go.
I wonder if that's like a parallel for, like, the level of self-awareness of the person. So the later with the like mentor scene with McLeod, he explains there will come a time, the gathering, where you'll feel an irresistible pull to a faraway land when there are very few of us left. And it's like probably like any very like physical urge. It's like how self-aware you are of the urges that are arising determines how much you react to them versus like notice them and suppress it and process it.
It's probably more like how much are you invested in the prize? How much are you invested in your life and the other immortal people that are walking this lonely road with you? Or how invested are you in killing them all and obtaining the prize?
Right.
But still, this is a hard open for this movie because we immediately jump in to wrestling, violence imagery, and then the first series of flashbacks he has is not him prepping for battle necessarily. It's literally them marching off to battle.
Oh, that's right.
We don't go back and establish the timeline leading up to the battle until after this fight scene, the sword fight scene that he has with Facile.
Right. The scene, the flashback when he's just sitting in the bleachers or sitting in the nosebleed section, whatever, is them marching off to war, but before they actually engage in battle.
Right.
And it's very much setting the tone of like brotherly camaraderie with his peers.
Right. So we don't get a lot of prep. We as viewers, cold viewers who have never experienced this mythology before, we don't get prep for this at all. We immediately get dumped in the deep end of the pool, narratively speaking, because we aren't going to get any kind of an explanation of who or what he is and why they're fighting for another 30 minutes maybe into the movie. So I always thought this was a really interesting choice for this movie because there's no build-up. We're just immediately dumped. The only build-up we get is through his flashback scenes.
McCloud chops his head off. Electricity. Spotlight on McCloud's face. Wind in his hair. Explosions blowing up all the glass windows of the vehicles.
Oil coming out the bottom.
Oil pouring out of the engines. And the orgasmic release of the experience of McCloud post-kill collapsing to the ground.
So clearly shit's happening, right? So not only, as previously stated, are we dumped into the deep end of the pool, but we've just realized that this pool might be supernatural.
Right.
Because not only did he cut this dude's
chopping
heads
off this guy's head wasn't just him chopping off a guy's head. There's some kind of power dynamic here that he is receiving.
Yeah, so this is a bold, cold opening for a movie. This is like we would expect this in a television show now, where you'd get immediately dumped into the narrative of the show and then go back and get an explanation. But really, movies of this time period, for the most part, you're expecting build-up. Like a slow transition where we sort of ease the viewer into what we're getting into.
It's like the whole world-building dynamic of you're exposing the reader to this foreign world, and the viewer/reader is expected to just absorb a series of details and accumulate that into what are the mechanisms of how this world operates. Right,
we're definitely trying to create an immediate sense of depth by not explaining anything.
Right, and this is like the sci-fi fantasy dynamic is the fantasy dynamic is you are in a world that is not like your Earth. There's some fundamental difference in how the world operates. And here's an example. All right, so after the fight scene, does he put up the sword?
We immediately go into a flashback.
I think we immediately go into flashback. I have post-origin story. Burning cross.
Yes.
On top of a building.
So the burning cross was like a...
Gondor calls for aid.
Gondor calls for aid. It was a clan's call. The clan is calling you to come to our defense. So it's interesting they include it because without context, that's a controversial symbol. But again, we just throw it in there because we are throwing all of these world building elements into this story to create a depth that really, there's not a ton of depth to this sort of supernatural creature that they've created. They're just immortal. I mean, they're immortal, but they don't have any additional powers or anything. The only thing they have is just over time, they gather power. And when you kill another one, you get to take that power. But above and beyond that, there's not a whole lot. So they're just long-lived humans. So they're really trying to be like, guys, this is cool. Just stick with us. We're gonna make you not regret that you bought this ticket. So it's just interesting that they throw a lot of narrative elements at us, just like rapid fire, right at the beginning, in an attempt to establish this just immediately rich mythology.
Right. So then we've transitioned to this ancient Scottish battle scene. We pan over to a peak with a man on a horse. Enter the Kurgan.
We get a little bro talking before they get to the battle.
Well,
we get a little establishment of the world, establishment of the fact that he's got friends, he's got a wife.
At this point, the listeners have watched the movie.
Well, I mean, but we get a dick joke. Can't skip the dick joke.
That's the brotherly camaraderie.
Right, but
building.
Synopsisizing is one of the things we do because it helps us walk through it. So don't skip stuff.
It's not in my notes.
That's not my Well, if your notes aren't complete.
I wrote the Kurgan spelling.
Kurgen. Gan.
All right, and then lore about Kurgan's strategy.
Lore
Okay.
about Kurgan's strategy.
So the Kurgan is talking to one of his lieutenants.
Remember our agreement, Murdoch. The boy is mine.
He's colluding with this clan. So the clan MacLeod is already going to battle with, I think it's the Frasers.
Frasers, yes.
And since they're going to battle with the Frasers, Kurgan is taking advantage of this opportunity.
So the Kurgan, we find out later, he's the one remaining member of a society
Ancient.
called the
civilization.
Kurgans.
Yes.
And he's just the last one. And so he is working with the Frasers, acting as their champion, whatever. And he has explained to everyone that the boy is mine. I'm guessing that. Okay, so from later, like Highlander lore, whatever, immortals can sense each other.
Yes.
So if the
This is
Kurgan is
established.
the only immortal around, and he literally immortals are the only ones that can sense other immortals, and he knows that Connor MacLeod is an immortal, the Kurgan must have been like sneaking around Glenfinnan village and noticed, ooh, here's an immortal that hasn't transitioned yet.
So we get so my main complaint with the Highlander universe in general, which the Highlander universe comprises 4 movies, 3 that were actually released in theaters, 1 made for TV movie, and then a whole TV series which ran for many years. Over the course of the Highlander television show, they play very fast and loose with the lore. There's times where they are able to sense an immortal who just has the potential to be an immortal. They're still mortal, they just haven't died.
Right, it's inconsistent. It's when it's
Yes.
convenient for the
And
plot.
there's also times where they're like, no, we don't know. You can't know until the person dies. So in Highlander 4 Endgame, Duncan MacLeod, who is the main character of the television show, as opposed to Connor MacLeod, who is the main Highlander, the main immortal in movies 1, 2, and 3. He actually senses that this woman that he's married has the potential to be an immortal. And we have a brief discussion about how, yes, but she has to die a violent death. So he ends up murdering her in order to make her immortal so they can be together forever, which she is not appreciative of. But it's implied that if he had not murdered her, she would have not become immortal. And there's an episode of the television show where there's a famous pianist, and the famous pianist is someone who has the potential to be immortal. And an immortal actually murders her to make her immortal. Of course, afterwards she can't play because her artistry was tied up in the passion of mortality, which is a whole other thing. But there's also several times where they're like, well, we don't know. You can't know until somebody dies whether they're going to be immortal or not. But it would make sense that you have the potential to be immortal, but you don't get to be immortal until you die a violent death because there's immortals of varying ages.
Right. Every immortal that you meet is a different age. They're not
Right.
all like mid-20s.
Right.
like,
Connor
prime
is supposed to be quite
health.
young. But then we have Sean Connery, who's clearly far older. So,
Far older.
I mean,
Like
if we just
40.
sort of assume that every once in a while they can sense an immortal, let's go with that. Then,
Right,
yes, the Kurgan must have
regardless,
sensed
in this case, the Kurgan knows that Connor MacLeod is a potential immortal. And there's something that he gets out of killing an immortal.
I have huge Highlander knowledge. Truly huge. Just want to throw that out there. Yes, there's something that he gets, which is just killing him before he has a chance to learn how to fight back. So he
stabs him and then gets ready for the decapitation. But the clan MacLeod rallies, recovers MacLeod, takes him back home, and we zoom in on MacLeod's eye as he's laying on the battlefield, and then when we zoom out, he's driving fast in his car out of the parking garage.
Immediately before this, just not to interrupt your synopsis again, but first he throws his sword up on this really strange thing in the
parking deck. There's a hole in the ceiling, and about 2 feet underneath it is this metal grate full of leaves. My speculation is that it's ventilation, because this is a completely enclosed parking deck. You need some kind of airflow, and this is just to catch debris coming from the top level.
So he tosses his sword up there, and we get one of the cooler scenes in the movie where he runs off into the mist created by the sprinklers and sort of disappears into the mist, which is one of my favorite.
Why are the sprinklers running? Oh, from the orgasmic electrical storm.
Yes, from the orgasmic electric storm.
All right, so I transition to car scene. Pulls out of the parking deck. He's coming up the ramp. The police pull up. And police brutality ensues. At this point, the police have no reason to suspect him. No. But they still very aggressively arrest him.
Point a gun at his head and cock it back.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't move, pal. Don't even breathe.
Transition. Let's see. Oh, wait. Side scroll to gut wound recovery.
Yes, in the past.
Yes. Flashback. Again.
Right. And we get the priest with the mullet mohawk. And inquiring minds want to know, is the mullet mohawk historically accurate?
Okay, regardless, I'm thinking of taking a screenshot when I go to the hair salon later this week.
It is magnificent.
It is a high quality, like wide mohawk.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a mullet hawk.
And I need a haircut before Thanksgiving pictures.
There is no other way to describe this than it's even partially shaved in the front.
Yes.
So that his mullet mohawk does not start until slightly farther back on his top of his head. Yep. This priest is sporting the most metal haircut.
It's a brave hairstyle.
It's brave. Yep. It's brave. Yeah, definitely.
Yep. All right. So the priest is giving death rites. They want him, the people around want him to stay longer. He says, there are other people dying, and walks out. And then we zoom in on a more and more pallid looking Christopher Lambert in a kilt and with a bandaged belly.
He's a Highlander, by God. The last sound he hears shall not be that of a wailing woman.
And then transition back to the crime scene.
Yes, this crime scene has more people in it somehow than the crime scene in Nick Knight.
How about the police chief tripping over the corpse and spilling his coffee?
And then the forensic technician arrives and she goes, "You're supposed to notify forensics at the same time as homicide," implying that there was a homicide called in that nobody called forensics to come in to investigate.
All right, so she goes underneath the crime scene.
String,
ribbon, whatever.
String with
and then
sign on it.
And then interrogation. Russell Nash,
yes.
Russell Nash at the police station, grilling him. What's this? A sword?
It's a magical moment.
You're an antique dealer, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. What's that?
A sword?
There's some pretty witty banter back and forth between the. I'm guessing the police chief.
Yeah, the police chief's the older fellow that sits at the desk.
Yeah, and then
Yes.
there's Garfield, the like.
He might not be. He might just be the captain, the captain of that particular precinct.
Right.
And then Garfield is like a beat cop.
Yeah.
The guy who picked him up and pointed
Beat
the
cop,
gun at
that's
him
the
for
word
no
I was looking
reason.
for.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the one who held the gun to his head and said, "Don't even breathe." And so Garfield throws a punch. Nash dodges. Nash retaliates. Am I being arrested? Not yet.
Then we're
And just
through.
walks out.
And he leaves. There are two moments here that are there's two establishing moments here. Okay, there's an establishing moment, and there's a moment that doesn't age very well. So when Brenda arrives, so Brenda is the forensics technician that arrives at the crime scene. And when she walks under the tape, she finds the sword. And it's the sword that they take and show to Nash. And he makes the wisecrack about it's just a sword. And she knows what this sword is as soon as she grabs it.
What the hell you got?
A Toledo Salamanca.
A what?
Sword, Frank. A very rare sword.
Was it worth much?
Only about $1 million. Any antique dealer on Hudson Street could tell you that.
So this is supposed to be an establishing moment for Brenda. Because Brenda knows swords. She's got a thing for swords. And there's also a moment here with Garfield, which is my second does not age well moment in the movie. And he calls Nash a slur, and they have kind of a back and forth about really wildly inappropriate
Why, Garfield? You cruising for
for a piece of ass. And it does not age well. This back and forth right here. This is not a moment that you still love about this movie 35 years later.
Well, I think Nash calling out the implication of the police officer is very woke.
Yeah, that's not a terrible moment. But just the fact that we include this dialogue at all is a little dated. It dates the movie.
Yeah, the culture of the police officer referring to that in a derogatory manner.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so we have the interrogation scene, and then Kurgan cruises into town.
Oh, the Kurgan. Clancy is selling the Kurgan.
Clancy Brown, Mr. Krabs.
Mr. Krabs. Mr. Krabs is selling this moment.
Right. So when we talked about Nick Knight versus Lacroix,
Yes.
the contrast, the foil,
Yes.
right? The Kurgan as the almost absurd level of seriousness of the Kurgan to being the creepy evil bad guy versus Nash / McCloud as being the kind of good guy.
Yes.
That chemistry, or even they don't interact much, but the contrast between the scenes of these two characters sets up the whole dynamic for the movie.
It does.
The franchise, in fact.
It absolutely does. And the reason this character works is Clancy Brown as the Kurgan works. Because anybody else at the helm of this character is a ridiculous character. This character is one of those that could easily have been ruin the movie. He could easily, and instead, he makes the movie.
Right. It's like Eddie Redmayne in Jupiter Ascending.
Yes.
Right? Eddie Redmayne just committing 150% to that character completely seriously makes the whole movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same here.
All right. So then the Kurgan gets to a hotel.
Generously, a hotel.
Generously speaking, it is a place that you can go to and pay for a room to sleep in.
Yes.
And then we have a whole montage of the Kurgan.
Well, before that, when he's walking in, there's a fellow sitting at the desk, and he goes,
That's right, Mr. Booger. Lucky strike means fine to buck.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's like the implied homeless guy that's just constantly interacting with the guy at the desk, and the guy at the desk is over it.
But I've always wondered, is this a plug? Is this a sponsored plug for Lucky Strike? Or
is this like a product placement?
this seems like such an incongruous line. Because first of all, the Kurgan signs into this hotel as Victor Kruger and under an assumed name. And then he like takes out a wad of cash and gives the guy a 20. And he says, hey man, anything you need, just dial O.
What does he say? Girls or blow, just dial O, man.
Yes. And then the guy's like, that's right. Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. And he says tobacco, but nothing in that
That's
scene
a good point.
would lead to that line. And he just goes, stop talking to the customers or shut up. We don't in any way explain why this man is plugging Lucky Strike cigarettes.
That's a good point.
But I thought, I
didn't interpret that as a product placement.
yes. Okay. But I is that what that is? I would be interested to know.
In retrospect, probably.
Yeah, because otherwise that line is just sort of floating out there in dialogue space.
So the Kurgan goes up to the room, and he only has a small suitcase with him. So he sets down the suitcase, unlocks the latches, opens it up, and it's a 4-piece sword.
Some assembly required.
Some assembly required. Some assembly and like sword form montage interspersed with him actually like mechanically assembling the sword, which the hilt, the guard, and the first half of the blade, the assembly mechanically, great, awesome, looks good, looks plausible. The second half of the blade connecting to the first half of the blade, there's only about generously 1.5 inches of metal inserting into the first half of the blade, and no visible mechanism of how that actually like latches and secures together. You'd need at least like half the length of the blade. Like the section of the blade. So probably like a good, 8-10 inches that would insert into the first half of the blade to make it rigid enough to be usable as a sword.
Deep Thoughts by Matthew Hoover.
Yeah. And so my engineering sense from a mechanical engineering training perspective, that sword would not withstand any kind of combat.
I shall simply refer to my earlier statement about the underdeveloped lore in the totality of the Highlander series.
Right. Okay. So there's the whole sword montage, and then
a companion arrives.
I feel like Rachel has a lot more to contribute about this next part.
Player 2 enters the game. So he does a cool... Okay, we get the sword assembly. We get some cool... I love when he rolls the sword around between his arms.
Yes.
And then someone knocks on the door and opens the door. And it's this, like, teased hair, leather-clad, somebody conjured up...
Like belly button V-neck, leather tunic.
Somebody conjured up an image of what they think a sex worker might look like. And they threw it into this section willy-nilly. And she says,
Hi, I'm Candy.
Of course you are.
which is probably the creepiest response he could have made. And we refer to this scene later because he's walking out of the hotel and the guy behind the desk says, "Hey, Candy said, you're a little kinky." And that's when he grabs him by the shirt and goes, "Never speak to me again."
I think there's a couple more lines there.
Not in the
Where
candy scene.
Well,
Just,
no. When he's
fade to
talking
black.
to the guy, he like kind of reiterates the point multiple times.
Yeah,
like
never
speak to me.
Look at me. Look at me. Don't fucking talk to me.
Yeah, basically. The Gathering.
He says, "The Gathering." And he like sniffs his sword.
Yes, that's why I wrote that down, because it was very like emphasized in the filming. The Gathering.
The Gathering.
The Gathering.
And we haven't heard this before
No,
yet.
this is our first introduction to the phrase "The Gathering," except at the very beginning when we get that dialogue patch with Sean Connery, where he records that small paragraph.
Yeah, which apparently was not in the original like plan.
This is a stronger movie without it because it's an exposition dump.
Yes.
Yes.
So at the very beginning of the movie, I think I had a note about intro text. Yes. But we didn't discuss it at the time. But originally the movie wasn't going to have this intro text, but we have like 8 or 10 sentences.
Yes.
And they're like, probably some focus groups or something. We're like, we don't know what's going on. And it's like, oh, you have to pay attention to the movie. What? We have to pay attention to the movie? Ugh. Just explain it to us beforehand. And so that's my perspective.
Yeah, it reminds
on
me
the
of
intro text.
the Blade Runner theatrical release where they included all the voiceover done by
Harrison Ford over the phone.
Yes. And so they added a ton of voiceover. And
it honestly is like, if you're paying attention to the movie, it really detracts from the movie.
Right. So I had only watched, so Blade Runner's not what we're reviewing, but just on a slight tangent here. Blade Runner, I had only ever seen the director's cut, which does not include the voiceover. And I tried watching it with the voiceover, and it was unwatchable. I felt like someone was spelling everything out to me, and I did not love it. But that's what we get at the beginning here, is a big exposition dump. So this is a more impactful moment if we don't have that at the beginning. Because this would be our first introduction to the idea of
the Gathering.
Yeah. Whatever that is, we've arrived.
Kurgan Candy scene over.
Kurgan Candy.
We cut to Brenda, the forensic technician /
sword expert,
like ancient metallurgist.
Yes.
Expert, whatever. One of the other technicians brings in a little a glass like microscope slide. Oh yeah, we recovered these metal shards from the body and his clothing. Mm-hmm. And she's like, okay, yeah. She looks back in her microscope, and then she kind of takes a breath, and then she looks at the slide and picks it up. And she's just looking at it. She hasn't put it in the microscope yet, but she's like very seriously considering the significance of this. And then she's at the crime scene.
No, she puts it in a like metallurgical analysis machine.
Oh, that's right.
And it gives her a
there's the
printout.
whole scene in the hallway where she's at like the mass spectrography machine.
Yes, and it gives her a printout.
And
she's like,
and as it's printing
what?
out data, she's like, no way. What? No, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
And then, and then we transition back to the parking garage, and Nash is collecting his sword from the
drain,
the ventilation grate.
Yeah, the drain
thing.
grate thing.
And at the same time, Brenda shows up with a metal detector. And she walks over to the concrete column, goes up it from the bottom.
With a metal detector.
With a metal detector.
Yes.
To the very prominent slash from the sword, the killing blow. And then it beeps. And my engineering sense says, why did that metal detector not detect the rebar in the concrete? But the metal detector must have a plot device installed on it, so it only detected the relevant metal shards.
Which was like a 1.5 inch by 3/4 inch chunk of metal.
Chunk off of this blade.
Absolutely fucking gigantic. There is no reason this amount of metal should have sheared off of this dude's blade, and he didn't notice.
And he didn't notice.
Right. This is a significant amount of
this is like
metal
you have
loss.
to reforge the sword.
Yes.
Because you have this large chunk of the blade missing.
And it's vertical. It's vertical in
the length of the blade.
No. It's up and down in the metal pillar, in the concrete pillar. When she pulls it out, it's not in the direction that the sword slashed into the pillar. It's up and down. She pulls it out, and it is...
Oh, from a different direction.
Yeah, it's top to bottom in the pillar.
Okay, so...
Not side to side.
This is reminiscent of fang bite marks.
Yes.
From a vampire.
Because... shit's confusing, okay? Horizontal,
there's no vampires in this
vertical.
movie, but...
we can't keep this shit straight. Just throw it in there. No one's going to notice that it is in the wrong direction. I always notice.
I'm wondering now if this is more of a lack of communication between the director/writers and the set people.
The concrete pillar slice is in the correct direction. It's clearly the same
That's
type.
A good point.
It's the slice that he put in there when he cut Fasil's head off. But the metal is
embedded vertically.
Embedded
in 90 degrees to the slash.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so she's extracting this large hunk of metal from the concrete pillar, and she hears some movement of Nash.
He kicks a glass
recovering
bottle.
his sword.
He kicks a glass bottle. Yeah.
Presumably on accident.
Maybe.
Who knows with Nash?
Who knows with Nash?
He's from lots of different places.
He moves in mysterious ways.
So she, as a woman alone in the 80s in a dark,
a woman alone,
remote environment,
ever. We don't need to timeline that.
Runs away to the stairs. Smart move. It's like the smartest move of any female character in a movie.
She's like, no. She just
GTFO.
And she's out.
So she goes to a bar and orders a very large drink.
Yes.
And then Nash shows up at the same bar.
Madison Square Gardens.
He orders a Glenmorangie.
Yes, double.
Which I meant to look that up. Double on the rocks. And Rachel noted how full his glass is. And I thought, he's immortal. He can handle his liquor.
Yeah, but I mean, he still just ordered a double. Glenmorangie is a whiskey.
Is it a Scotch?
It just says whiskey.
Okay. Yeah. My assumption was it was Scotch because he's a Highlander.
It's buttery, fruity, malty, and has a depth of flavor that's hard to beat at its age.
I'll keep my eye out.
It's a Highland single malt whiskey.
Highland single malt whiskey.
Yes.
Probably not classified as legit Scotch or whatever.
It has to come from the Scotch region of Scotland. No offense intended. Uncomprehended.
Forgive our ignorance. He makes some very poor flirtatious attempts.
Leading flirtation attempts. He's just like, Madison Square Gardens. And she's like, what? He's like,
you go there often?
No, he goes, what? Like I didn't say anything. Until she goes and sits next to him. And then she's like, what did you say?
She stands next to him in a stance like she's ready to run away.
Yes. I mean, kudos to her.
Like, she is a smart, like street smart female character.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but he just walks in. He announces Madison Square Gardens, and both her and the
Madison
bartender.
Square Garden. You go there often?
No. Both her and the bartender go, what? And he goes,
Go to the garden often.
What did you say?
Like he didn't say anything. And then she goes over and stands next to him and says, what did you say? And he goes, oh, Madison Square Gardens. Go there often? Maybe for wrestling?
You know, the circus. The circus, something else, wrestling.
She's like, are you following me? And he's like, I want to walk you home, Brenda.
I'd like to walk you home, Brenda.
And somehow,
Totally not creeper vibe.
and somehow, some way, by some miracle, this woman resists that almost irresistible.
She throws some money on the counter and leaves.
She says, I can take care of myself, pays for her drink and leaves. I mean, how you don't fall for that? Just, she must have like just a vagina of steel because, I mean, he was throwing it down thick. She just wasn't picking it up. He's had 450 years to figure out how to pick up women. And that's what he's got. I'd like to walk you home, Brenda. First of all, she never told him his name.
Right,
her name.
Right.
She never told him her name.
This is the first time they've interacted directly.
Yes.
And he knows her name.
Right. And somehow she doesn't pick up.
We never actually explain
Yeah.
how he knows her name.
Yes, we do.
How?
So there's a scene. Oh, we haven't gotten there quite yet. I was going to say, he's reading her book later.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes. He owns a copy of her book.
He's read her
and
book.
the cover page of her book has a portrait of her, like headshot of her with her bio. Okay. So he just recognizes her by chance from his library.
Yes, because he's read her tome on a metallurgical history.
It was
of
like
sword
her
making.
PhD or whatever.
Yeah.
So he leaves, like, we exit the bar scene. The hunter becomes the hunted.
Yes, because Brenda is following him.
Yes. So he is leaving the bar.
Despite his clever attempts. at
After
picking
he
her
has
up.
recovered his sword.
Yes.
Brenda is following him because he's like hella sus. and then the Kurgan shows up.
Yes.
And
He tries to defeat him with a rope.
a pipe and a rope.
A pipe and a rope.
Yeah.
Like in Clue.
You got your sword, dude.
No. It is relevant that he doesn't pull his sword out in this scene. Because Brenda is specifically following him to find this sword.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So
had he pulled this sword out, he's tipping his
okay.
hand.
So the shards of the sword, the shards of metal that were recovered from the victim's body and clothing revealed some very specific information to Brenda, the PhD ancient sword metallurgist
Who works with the NYPD as a forensics
who works as a
analyst.
forensic analyst, conveniently. She realizes, wow, these shards of metal are aged like pre-BC, but using techniques that should not have been available until like
The Middle
1500.
Ages, yes.
And WTF.
So she's on the hunt
So
for a
she's
mythical
looking
sword.
for this sword that should not exist.
Really, nobody's investigating the death of the guy who got his head cut off. That's not even relevant. Kind of the cops are.
Yeah, it's
But not Brenda.
Yeah.
Brenda don't give a shit. Brenda's trying to find this sword. That's the only reason she is following Nash. So it's important that he doesn't pull his sword out in this scene, because it's the sword she's looking for. And if he pulls it out, she's not left.
Right. She would see a katana.
Yes.
And be like, what the fuck?
Is that the one I'm looking for?
Yeah.
Right. So it's crucial.
Okay. So it's relevant that he does not pull out his sword.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he fends off the Kurgan. They both escape. And we go back to the past.
Back to the past.
It's a bar scene. Or tavern. I guess tavern.
Yes.
Pub? Medieval Scotland. It's the townspeople discussing he was dead. And he's
not dead.
He's not dead. There's something wrong with
I'm pretty
that.
sure that's the devil.
And then walks in as everybody's discussing how like morally wrong it is that he survived. In walks Connor McLeod.
Which, say what you want about Christopher Lambert's acting in this movie, but he does a very good job of implying when he is younger and when he is older.
Yes.
Yes. So he appears youthful in this moment.
I would say Christopher Lambert's acting in this movie, just comprehensively, very good. His inflection.
He learned English for this movie.
Right.
Yes.
Right. This was, Rachel told me earlier, this was his second movie where he had to speak English.
Yes.
And his first movie where he had to speak English, he had like 3 lines.
He was Tarzan.
So he just spoke it, he just memorized it phonetically.
Yes.
And so this was the first movie that he was ever in that he had to like converse in English.
And not only that, but he worked with a coach to have a non-specific accent. So he has an accent that isn't specifically from anywhere in particular.
Right.
So he's not only learning English, he's learning English with a different accent.
So like my main criticism of him in this movie is there are like, I'd say 75%. He's great. He sells the character. He does a really good job. But there's some scenes where his intonation comes off as just really flat. And it seems like there's no like emotional investment in what he's saying. And that's probably just a side effect of the fact that he learned English for this movie. It's like Javier Bardem in, I think it was No Country for Old Men. I think that was one of his first like full American like movie roles. And his accent is really like weird in that movie because Javier Bardem is from Spain.
He's also from northern Spain, which
Right.
has an entirely different accent than
Right.
other parts of Spain.
Accent and dialect.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that can work really well because you get this whole like exotic element to how they're talking.
I'd watch Javier Bardem.
That was
gibberish.
Rachel. Rachel just had like a mouth open eye roll, like, oh.
Oh, Javier.
Yes, I would watch Javier Bardem in pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, him.
Yeah.
I would say him in Skyfall. I really liked his character.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Oh.
absolutely. All right, let's see. Back to my notes. Oh, yeah, so he's in... Okay, we're back to the tavern.
Ah, yes.
We're back on point.
Right,
Okay.
and we believe he's young when he walks in.
Yes, he plays this character believably as a, like, 20-year-old, like, Scottish guy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so all his friends are there, like everyone that he's grown up with.
And surprise, guys, I'm not dead.
Everyone backs away from him. No one will look him in the eye. This woman who has kind of implied that she would do anything for him.
I think it's implied she's his wife.
Or at least like
Lover.
betrothed.
They make
lover.
they make some sex references at the very beginning. Yeah.
She's saying some very negative things about him. His two brotherly comrades are kind of like, yeah, okay, sure. It is weird that he was dead last night and now he's up and walking around.
One is, but his other cousin is not. Dougal doesn't. Dougal's the one who's like, you need to leave.
One kind of completely turns on him.
He's in league with Lucifer.
Don't say that, Kate.
I'll say it. You've the devil in you.
My perspective is the woman is interacting more with the one guy, and he's kind of feeding off her skepticism about the whole thing. But then Dougal is a little bit older, and he's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of weird. Okay. And then Connor comes in, interacts with them, and then Dougal's like, dude, get out of here. Like, run before anything bad happens.
Cheese it, my friend.
And Connor completely disregards this sage advice and gets strung up like a demon.
He gets put in like a stocks kind of thing. He gets like a yoke.
Yeah, he gets tied up to a yoke and stoned out of town.
The real loser in this scene is the chickens. In fact, I think we rewound this scene so I can show you the fact that a chicken gets kicked. Poor little chickens are just roaming about the square. They didn't know that this was stoning day.
The crowd runs after McLeod.
And a chicken gets kicked.
Yep, and a chicken gets kicked. Poor chicken.
Poor chicken.
Ruminating in the room-inator. Which is his room of ancient artifacts.
Yes, in his apartment. His like circular room full
Yes,
of...
his circular room that he ruminates in.
Yes.
And then I don't think anything significant happens between
Only that
these
there's
two
more
flashbacks.
windows in this apartment than Nick Knight had in his apartment. And there's clearly it's matte paintings outside these windows.
Right, yes. Okay.
But they're well done.
We both noticed this. If you look through the windows at the buildings outside as the camera pans around, if you watch the backdrop, it's just like a matte painting, like a giant canvas like wall painted to look like a cityscape.
Outside his windows.
Outside of his windows. Like probably like 50 feet out away from his windows. And so you get a little bit of parallax as the camera pans across the room. But if you pay attention to the backdrop, you realize, oh, all these buildings in the backdrop are staying exactly the same position. Okay, it's just a giant
It's well
painting.
done.
But if you were not deliberately paying attention to the backdrop,
If you haven't seen
it's
this movie
really high
145 times,
Yeah.
and you're looking out the windows instead of looking at Christopher Lambert as he brutally walks down the stairs. Brutally walks down the stairs, not brutally.
Right.
Yeah,
Rude.
it's well done. It's well done.
Just want to acknowledge the quality of the set team.
There's nothing wrong with
They
a
did a
good
really
matte
good job
painting.
with
You
that.
can't always film in a loft in New York or something, but as long as it's
All
well
right, so
done.
he walks into the room-inator and fade to him blacksmithing. Let's see, he's blacksmithing and then he's kind of making out with Heather. And then enter Sean.
Sean Connery.
Highlight of the movie.
He jumps over. He interrupts a moment, sexual moment on the side of the hill.
An intimate moment.
An intimate moment on the hill. And introduces himself as Juan Villalobos.
Greetings. I am Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, Chief Metallurgist to King Charles V of Spain, and I'm at your service.
Long Spanish name. Chief Metallurgist to Charles V of Spain. In no way having any other accent besides his usual Sean Connery accent.
So when we mentioned the intro text, they had the intro text narrated by Sean Connery. That was recorded remotely over the phone while Sean Connery was living in Spain, working with a Spanish language tutor to perfect his Spanish accent.
It's all lies.
And we thought, what's a Spanish accent? There's no Spanish accent.
It's all lies. It's just Sean Connery talking. You know what? He spent however long he was supposed to spend in Spain just hanging out in Spain. He was, every time they called, they were like, Sean, how's the Spanish accent going? And he's like, great. Thanks for asking. And never did anything. He was like, what? You hired me because I'm Sean Connery. You're going to get Sean Connery. If you didn't want Sean Connery, you should have hired Javier Bardem. And he just left it at that.
Right. So it's Sean Connery in a very 1600s Spanish outfit with a very Spanish looking facial hair. And
a pointy beard.
A pointy beard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my next note is lightning on a cliff.
Yes. We explain the quickening.
And Christopher Lambert as lightning arcs across the sky.
Yes. This is the first time we talk about the quickening. And he somehow teleports from just talking to Sean Connery to standing on a picturesque cliff getting hit by lightning as we discussed the quickening.
Right, which is how the immortals sense each other. Well, part of it.
Yeah.
Which I like later. He talks some more about the quickening. So we have a training montage.
Yes.
With Sean Connery. I have a note about Depth Strider 3, which is a Minecraft reference to walking at the bottom of the water. But Sean is explaining to Connor McLeod about how he can't die. He's an immortal. We're the same, you and I.
We are brothers.
We are brothers.
We are the same, McLeod. We are brothers.
Yes, that's one of my most quoted lines.
And so there's a whole balance scene on a boat, and Sean's playing it fast and loose with the boat, and eventually knocks him off into the water, and he sinks to the bottom. Oh, the transitions into this scene. Rachel mentions that she loves the like dingy, like poorly maintained fish tank in Russell Nash's apartment because the only time you ever see it is in this when you transition into and out of this scene.
Yes.
So you zoom in to the fish tank and then you transition to Connor McLeod at the bottom of the lake.
Yes.
Or the loch.
The loch.
Loch S something.
I don't think we named the body of water.
He mentions that he's from the town Glenafon next to Glenfinnan.
Loch Shiel.
Loch Shiel.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's the same place because I don't think he's traveled very far. Scotland's not that big.
It's big enough.
It's big enough. That's what she said.
Oh.
All right, so we explained some lore. There's a whole training montage, lots of fighting on edges of cliffs. And then we go to the market with Sean and Connor and Heather. And Sean explains, "Oh, you need to leave her, mate." I've had 3 wives over the last 3,000 years. And the last one was 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And
her father made me this sword.
He said, "I would save you that pain. You need to leave her."
Yes.
But he doesn't.
Also, you can't have kids. So.
Yeah. Immortals can't have kids.
I feel like you could have explained that to Heather.
Right?
Yeah.
You could have explained to Heather, like, "Hey, we've been trying for like 15 years. It's not working. Maybe we can find some like orphans or whatever."
You're 28 now. You can probably still have kids.
Did you see anybody at the market that you really liked? Like, obviously, I can't give you kids.
But, if you want to go...
Maybe you could find somebody, like, work something up.
Matt's doing like a sensual wiggle
like
over there.
Shimmy.
He's
I'm
really trying to
shimmy.
sell the idea that Connor might actually get Heather to go outside the bonds of marriage in an attempt to have kids, which she doesn't canonically.
They never have that conversation.
Right, because we have a good flashback with her where we sort of cover their life together, and clearly kids are not a part of it.
Right.
Unless you count baby goats. But we do get the origin of the sword in this scene.
Oh, yes. At the market, Sean, and I don't even remember his first name.
Juan Villalobos.
Juan. Okay. Juan. What do they call him?
Ramirez.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Everybody always refers to him as Ramirez.
Even though he's not Ramirez. He's Egyptian.
I cannot swim, you Spanish peacock.
I'm not Spanish, I'm Egyptian.
You said you were from Spain. You're a liar.
Well, that incarnation. Yes. Okay. So on top of the whole Sean Connery as Juan Villalobos Ramirez, Sanchez, whatever.
Yeah.
Apparently before he was Spanish, he was from Egypt.
He was originally Egyptian.
Yes.
You can tell by the way he is. I want to see this movie remade. Okay, we're going to get to this. But I want to see this movie remade with the actors, the actual ethnicity that they claim to be.
Of their origins.
Yes.
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 Yes. Like the Kurgan as like a Mongol.
Yes.
And Ramirez as an Egyptian.
Right.
Yes.
And
I think
Connor as a Scottish person.
Christopher Lambert looks Scottish enough.
He sells it. He sells it.
Yeah.
Would he sell it in 2022?
Honestly, with a little more vocal training.
Well, yeah. So in the past, I want him to have a better Scottish accent. In the modern day scenes, I'm okay with his ambiguous accent.
His ambiguous neutral accent is very appropriate for modern, like present day. But he should have definitely had a more pronounced Scottish accent in the flashbacks. Yeah, Sean explains the origin of his sword because his last wife in like 500 something BC was a Japanese princess and
Shikiko.
and her father Masamune forged him this sword, which is unparalleled. It's unique, just like Shikiko.
Just like Shikiko. And like Sean. R.I.P. Sean.
R.I.P. Sean. And then, let's see, is there anything between there and the Kurgan in the tower?
Yes, we go back for a brief moment into modern times. And we cover that one of the detectives saw Brenda talking to Nash. And the only reason we cover this is because later we find out that they're following Brenda in an effort to find out more information about Nash. So really the only thing we cover is, we only cover that because later he's going to look out the window and see a guy in a car. And we got to know why they're following Brenda. And there is a third did not age well moment because they're swapping stories with each other. And he says, "Can you believe this? This guy's Vietnamese neighbor ate his dog." It's exactly the stereotypical moment.
I did not pick that up. I must have been writing.
Yes. He goes, "Can you believe it? This is the kind of shit people call it to me." And this doesn't age well. This does not age well.
We transition to Sean and Heather, or Ramirez and Heather, in an ancient Scottish tower. And they're drinking a lot. And Ramirez is regaling Heather with tales of his former loves and conquests, escapades. When she says, "Would you like some more wine?" "Oh, yeah, sure." And then zoom in on Sean's face. Shocked expression. Turn to the side. He's sensed something coming.
What could it be?
It's the Kurgan. Door literally explodes. And here comes Clancy.
The Kurgan doesn't just open a door. No. You don't get to be called the anything by having some sort of moderation in your personality.
The Kurgan turns the knob and opens the door. No.
Victor Kruger opens the door. The Kurgan, he just implodes doors. He just looks at them and they blow inward.
And Sean realizes he's like 10 drinks in and he's not ready for this. And I don't know if we covered where Connor is.
We don't. They just had a final training montage where he kind of does like a, let's see if you can best me if we're actually trying to defeat each other. And that's the one where he says this.
"Now, pendejo, shall we see what sort of swordsman you've become?"
So he calls him pendejo.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This was the most Spanish thing that I had heard Sean say.
I think they're trying to go for, look, he's Spanish, guys. He said pendejo, which at the time, in 1600s-ish, Spain. It is used to describe pubescent teens who thought they were adults.
Which is very appropriate for the guy that he's training to fight.
It's far less appropriate now. It means more like idiot or...
Yes, it's much more derogatory now.
Yeah, but he calls him he goes, let's see, pendejo. And so they fight. And so after that, we don't see Sean again. He could be in town. He could be off gallivanting. We don't know. But he's not here in this moment. It's just Ramirez or whatever his Egyptian name.
We don't see Connor.
You don't see Connor.
Connor's off doing something.
Yes, it's just Ramirez and Heather when the Kurgan implodes the door.
Kurgan! Ramirez.
So there's a pretty good fight scene as ascending the stairs of this tower. And every time the Kurgan misses and his sword hits the wall just explodes.
Implodes.
Sometimes it explodes. Sometimes it implodes. Whatever's convenient for the plot.
Look, he's throwing around a lot of raw power. Okay, he's got.
These are two ancient immortals.
He's got huge quickening. Huge. So big. It's so big when he wags it around. Just knocks
blows up
down.
walls.
It blows up walls and shit. Look, he's got a huge quickening, and he knows how to use it.
So pretty early in the encounter, Sean slashes the Kurgan's neck, which the scar on the Kurgan's neck is very visible. Like as soon as he
is introduced. Yes.
And so this is where he got that slash from. And it changes his voice. So I was paying attention to his voice in the first scene where we see him, where he gut stabs Connor, and he has a much more like smooth baritone voice.
Yeah, he definitely goes from Ramirez to
Ramirez.
We pointed at each other. It was another magical moment.
It definitely expands on the backstory of the Kurgan. Like the Kurgan is older than Ramirez, and the Kurgan had gone that long without receiving some type of maiming injury.
Yes. We also are establishing that their neck is extremely vulnerable because they don't scar anywhere else.
That's right.
And yet he scars on his throat. So we're kind of establishing that not only is beheading, just because it's sort of hard to come back from beheading, like the final death for immortals, but also that their neck in general is their weak point.
Okay, so the Kurgan gets his neck slashed. It kind of closes up pretty quick because as they're climbing the stairs, the Kurgan talks to Ramirez, and he already gets that like raspy voice. To make a long story short, the Kurgan kills Ramirez, and in the orgasmic throes at the top of the stairs of the tower, the entire tower and the stairs that the Kurgan is standing on collapse. He falls to the ground, and then Heather comes to investigate.
Well, she pops up over.
She pops up like he just fell down here. Is he dead?
She's spending this whole battle scene sort of running away. Because there's rocks being tossed around, walls are falling, lightning's crashing down from the sky. Shit's going sideways. She was just having a delightful dinner with a friend, drinking some wine, and now her home is collapsing on top of her, and two dudes are sword fighting up the stairs. So she's sort of reacting appropriately. And when he falls down, she kind of pops up to investigate. Like maybe that was the end of him. And I think he says something like, "My pretty."
Yeah, he grabs her by the neck and says, "Hello, my pretty."
Yeah, and that's the end of that scene.
So then we pop back to the city. And Brenda has been doing some research.
Oh, Brenda.
Brenda, so we're in a room with some computers, and Brenda and another, like, probably forensic technician, computer expert guy. He pulls up some, like, graphical handwriting analysis that wouldn't have existed then, to compare the signatures on like property deeds for like 5 generations on this business that Nash owns / lives in, and all of these signatures match.
So what you got here, Brenda, is a guy who's been creeping around since at least 1700, pretending to croak every once in a while, leaving all his goods to kids who've been corpses for years, and assuming their identities.
Big plot reveal. And the birth certificates for all of the names of the inheritors are all children who died at birth. She hasn't
done that one yet. We don't investigate that quite yet, because that's not till she comes back and confronts Rachel about it. It's not until after the dinner.
Well, it's the other technician guy says, like, so we have a guy.
What you've got here is a guy that's been lurking around since the 1700s, pretends to die every once in a while, shows up as his own long-lost relative, and signs for his own stuff. But she doesn't do the research on the birth certificates yet.
I'll take your word for it, because you've watched this movie about 20 times more than I have.
Because she's about to go talk to Rachel. And the first time she goes to talk to Rachel, she hasn't done that investigation yet.
My next note is, Mr. Nash isn't here.
That's Rachel.
Right. She goes to Mr. Nash's emporium and
antiques. It's our Nash's Antiques. It's on the
tomatoes, and says, I want to talk to Mr. Nash.
Right,
Mr.
and she
Nash
says she's not here, but he comes down
and she says, Russell Nash is dead.
That's the second time she comes back.
That's the second time she goes to his apartment?
This time he comes down and walks out of the elevator, and he's like, it's okay, Rachel. I'll talk to her. And they walk over and look at the display case that's to the left of Rachel.
Isn't that when he goes to the Ruminator?
No, because
this is the second time in the Ruminator.
He says, do you cook? He says this.
Do you cook?
Why?
I thought we might have dinner.
Did you?
Yes.
Which is his heavy-handed attempt at getting her to go out on a date with him.
Oh, yeah,
Because this is the initial, he's investigating her scene. Because prior to the montage scene that we just had,
Brenda visits Nash, flirting ensues.
Yes. Brenda visits Nash, flirting ensues. That's
and
this
then
moment right now.
The police masculine conspiracy against the intelligent, competent woman. And that's where the bald guy gets sent to monitor her apartment.
So that's why he's waiting outside, because remember earlier when we had the brief modern time interlude, they established that Brenda was contacting Nash, and that's why they're following her. So he goes to her apartment after that stupendous way of inviting himself over by asking her if she cooks. Which is just, if a man walked up to me and was like, do you cook? I'd be like, you know what? Fuck off. I'm not cooking for you. Who invites themselves over for dinner that way?
Hold on. I have the conspiracy against the intelligent woman and then flash back to Nazi Germany.
Yes, so that's why when he leaves to go to Brenda's apartment, he's upstairs looking out the window and Rachel walks up. And she says, "Do you remember when we met?" And that's when we get the flashback of her saving him, of him saving her in Nazi Germany.
Right. Yeah, we have a close up of her face, and then like she's in a little box room, and somebody opens it up, and in pops Christopher Lambert.
Yes, and we get the cool explosion glass shard transition. Like the window exploded and it took us back to the past.
And he says, "I'm like you. I'm all alone."
Yes.
And so she, apparently that's charismatic enough, she immediately trusts
Hey,
him.
it works on somebody.
One
buddy. It works on one buddy. But he gets his, it's a kind of magic.
You're alive. Why didn't you die?
Hey, it's a kind of magic.
Which becomes the title of the soundtrack. And then he dispatches the Nazi officer, soldier, whatever. And then...
Then when we come back, we're downstairs getting
hold
ready
on.
to leave.
As he's talking to the German guy, classic Lambert raspy laugh.
It really is iconic.
It is. That's his like signature, like the arrogant, like I am totally winning and you don't even realize it.
Yes.
Response of whatever character Christopher Lambert is playing. He does that with like, there's no like vocalization. It's just the yeah. Yeah. So then date night with Brenda.
Date night with Brenda.
Sparkly.
Which she somehow agreed to. Even after that stellar opening line. Do you cook?
Okay. So this is just as much her being intrigued by the Russell Nash character.
I'm not saying she doesn't have an ulterior motive.
Right.
I'm saying he could try a little fucking harder to be charming.
Maybe she probably wanted him to try a little harder.
He was trying to see how little he could try and she would still go with it. That's believable. I believe that. Yes, because
literally the medieval man.
Yeah. Do you cook? You could cook for me.
So it's just as much her being like intrigued and attracted to the Russell Nash as much as, okay, there was this crazy sword that should not exist at this crime scene. There was an antiques dealer who's like very, very shady, also at the crime scene. He knows some stuff. I need to learn more because this could be like a big breakthrough just for me, like career-wise.
She's in this for the swords.
She's in this for the swords. And
that's only
the
partially
sword.
A euphemism. But we do get this wonderful line.
What are you going to do?
The question is, what are you going to do? You going to turn off the tape or are you going to shoot me with a 45?
After he spent some time walking around and he sees all of the stuff, because she's in the other room getting stuff ready. So apparently she actually did cook for him. And you mentioned that this is a very good scene where we're seeing Russell Nash, the immortal.
Yes, I mentioned to Rachel that this scene, this date night scene was the most prominent contrast of Connor McLeod, the immortal, versus Russell Nash, the particular incarnation of Connor McLeod, like masking to live productively in society. And so like we see his behavior like very efficiently scouting the apartment and collecting all the relevant pieces of information about how Brenda is acting weird, like anything wonky. He like immediately gravitates to and investigates. And then while he's doing that, just very smoothly, she's talking from the other room and he's responding extremely like smoothly conversationally. And so we're seeing this contrast of how aggressively and efficiently he is basically doing reconnaissance while maintaining his cover and just continuing this smooth conversation. And then she comes in and he opens a bottle of Hennessy. Yes. From the year 1783.
It's a very good year.
It's a very good year, he says. And Rachel remarked that this was the first time we get to see one of his flashbacks from the outside.
Yes, we don't get a clip here.
Right. We don't get a visual cut to a different scene, like a whole different like sub-narrative, whatever. We just see him like eyes closed, like experiencing the memory of like one or more flashbacks, and he's just narrating. And I think this is another example of where Christopher Lambert just acts really well as Connor McLeod, the immortal. And then he comes out of it, and she says, she kind of cocks her head back to the side. "What's that?" "Oh, that's for you. Can I open it?" "If you like."
If you like, yes.
And so she opens it.
A present.
It's her effing book.
Yeah, it's her book. And he's like, "Touche, motherfucker."
Like, I know there was some pretense here where you had an ulterior motive allowing me to come here and making me dinner, whatever. You're not the only one with ulterior motives.
Yeah, he's like, "Funny, your biography mentions that you work with the police, and there's a police officer sitting outside."
So when he first got there, he asked her what she did. And she said, Oh, I work with the Metropolitan Museum and in acquisitions."
Yes.
And he says, "Oh, it's funny. Your bio in that book doesn't say anything about the Met."
She's like, "You bastard."
All right. So this is where we cut back to Connor and Heather, where Sean says, "You must leave her, brother."
That's after the second. Oh, okay. Nope. Yep. You got this. You got this.
I got this. And then we have a whole long montage of Heather aging while Connor does not.
To the sultry, immortal tones of Freddie Mercury singing "Who Wants to Live Forever." Man, this is a moment. This is a film moment. I mean, the setting is gorgeous. The set is gorgeous. Heather's makeup is suspect.
What do you mean? They put her in a white wig and they dyed her eyebrows white. She's obviously like 70 years old.
She could have been 38. This is like 1500s. But what saves this moment is "Who Wants to Live Forever."
Absolutely.
And this is the song that needs to play over every sad moment in your life. Ever. every positive moment, just any impactful moment in your life, put on Who Wants to Live Forever. And just live in that moment, because Freddie Mercury didn't have to sing that for us, but he did, and it's his gift to us. And if we don't appreciate it, then who are we as people?
We're worthless.
We're worthless. This is a fucking gorgeous moment right here. This is the scene, one of those scenes that makes a movie where you're like, okay, it's been good. It's been funny. We've had a nice sort of popcorn mix of serious moments, happy moments, sort of light moments where the movie doesn't take itself too seriously. But then we get this little montage where he's realizing that everyone he ever loves is going to grow old and die.
All right, and with that, we're back to the future. On a bridge.
Cast
with
here.
Not to be flippant, but the token black guy.
This is a pretty whitewashed movie.
Yeah. It's the African immortal guy meeting on the bridge.
So, the gathering is here. Time's almost caught us, my friend.
Has it?
Castagir's attitude about this reminds me a lot of in The Matrix, where Tank puts them all under on the ship, goes something like, "God damn, what a time to be alive!" Like, because Neo is there and Neo is the one, and so Castagir is like, "Yeah, it's the gathering.
I'm so glad I lived to
see this. Yeah. What a time to be alive." They kind of chat a little bit and part ways, and they hadn't seen themselves since 1783, which is the same year as the Hennessy that McLeod opened for Brenda.
Yes.
1783, 1786.
Because he says it's been 100 years.
Oh, it's 1985.
Says it feels like it's been 100 years. And he goes, it has been 100 years.
Yes, yeah. When he's talking to Castagir. Yeah, Castagir is, man, it feels like it's been 100 years. It has been 100 years. And then 80s grunge Kurgan is the vibe for the whole movie.
Oh, well, no, we get the fun flashback of the last time they were together when Christopher Lambert accidentally insulted somebody and ended up in a duel. And he gets stabbed.
Was Castagir there?
Yeah. And he gets stabbed a bunch.
Oh, yes. The drunken duel scene
is my favorite
hilarious.
Flashback. Yes. This is a much needed
It adds
resting
a lot of levity to all of this serious stuff that's been building up.
Yes, this is a much needed resting point for us as viewers at this point, because we jumped in cold and it's just been going pretty much since we jumped in. Very little has actually happened between the two storylines, but because we have two storylines going, it feels like a lot has happened.
Right.
And this is almost incongruous because we don't really see Castagir again. And he's not even really in the flashback. But this nice little funny flashback where Connor gets stabbed repeatedly while his wig is falling off. He's obviously drunk.
Right, and his opponent, what's his name?
Bassett.
I was thinking Basalt, but Bassett. Okay. Yeah, Bassett. He's like, Bassett, I'm sorry I called your wife a...
bloated warthog.
A bloated warthog.
I bid you good day. And he just leaves.
Stop, sir. I beseech you. I apologize for calling your wife a bloated warthog. And I bid you good day.
So after he gets stabbed, 5 or 6 times?
Yeah,
he's just like, you know what, we're done.
And Bassett's like cleaning his sword, putting it away, and then Connor stands back up like, oh, wait, what are we... I've gone blind. because his wigs in his
funny.
face.
It's light. It's a much needed moment because this is our last resting point before we get to kind of the climactic action of the rest of the movie, which is a lot. We don't get a lot more plot development after this. It's just the Kurgan doing his shit for the next 45 minutes.
Right. Yeah. After this duel scene finishes, it's like full 80s grunge Kurgan, like marching out of the hotel. And I think for the Kurgan, this is immediately after the candy scene. Or is this later? Because he's on the way to the church.
Not yet, because he's got to kill Castigear.
That's right.
Right. We go from this flashback to there's a fellow in a car, a previously unknown character, and we follow him as a third party character.
So at this point, as the gun bootlegger, as I named him, is driving along and sees the Kurgan and Castigear fighting, I thought, could I actually name my child Clancy?
How a man named Clancy plays the Kurgan as well as he plays the Kurgan, and then goes on to be the voice of Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob. That's range. That is range.
He needs a biopic.
He really does. He was also in Earth 2. Do you remember Earth 2?
He's been in a ton of stuff.
Yeah, he's been in a lot of stuff. But he kills the Castigear here. And this is mostly relevant because our third-party observer, who we only see in this moment and we only see briefly after this, witnesses it.
Right.
And is able to give a description to the police.
Right. And this is the third time that we've seen one immortal kill another and see the result.
Yeah, the quickening.
The quickening.
Yeah, and this is a cool scene also where he's telling the police what happened because we do not get his direct dialogue. He says the intro to what he's about to say, and then we cut to kind of a several rooms away through the window view with kind of a innocuous thing happening over the intercom.
Right.
While he gestures wildly, apparently talking, but we don't hear it.
Right, but we hear the last of it.
Well, we cut back to their shocked expressions.
Yeah.
And the police are like, okay, thanks.
All right, so Kurgan kills Castigear.
No.
What? Okay, and then the police question the gun bootlegger about the whole thing. We see the Kurgan experience the quickening after killing Castigear. He walks out to the street, stops a car, pulls a guy out. There's an elderly couple in a car. Pulls the old guy out, hops in, and just says, "Hey, Ma," and starts driving.
Mom.
So he's joyriding with Grandma. I think that's when we see the big neon sign.
Yes, we get a glimpse
Silver
of
Cup
it.
Studios.
Yes, and we're going to come back to this idea of him driving somebody around at the end. So this is a foreshadowing.
All right, so now we kind of circle back to Connor and Heather's like aging montage, where just before she dies, she asks that Connor light a candle for her on her birthday to remember her. So Connor's at a church, some big like Catholic cathedral thing, lighting a candle. He says a quick prayer, and then he goes and sits down. And then the Kurgan comes in, kind of sloppy, like just sauntering in.
Devil may care attitude.
He goes over to where the candles are, and he just kind of plop, 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 like swats out all the candles.
Yeah, and he terrorizes some nuns. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's got a haircut.
He has gotten a haircut. So at the beginning, when the Kurgan was first introduced, he had a full head of black hair. But now he's mostly shaved. And when Connor remarks on this, he says he's in disguise.
Yes, and he
that
also
way they won't recognize me.
He also has safety pins through his scar.
Yes, the scar on his neck from Ramirez, he has put probably 20 safety pins through.
Yes, he said, I'll see your 90s or late 80s grunge, and I will raise you some pretty hardcore metal. I mean, he's got like a chainmail.
Yeah, he goes from grunge
sleeve
to heavy metal.
Yeah, he's got like a grunge sleeve, like a chainmail sleeve. He's got a leather jacket. He's got a tattoo on the side of his head of a dragon, which is the only part of his head that still has hair. Because the dragon
tail
has
of the
hair.
dragon is the one remaining lock of hair on his head, which makeup, awesome job.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bald cap, but it's a well done bald cap.
Yes, it's a well done bald cap.
The priest attempts to kick him out because they can't hurt each other on holy ground.
Right. This is one of the
rules.
Biggest rules that Ramirez taught Connor is you never fight on holy ground. You're always safe on holy ground.
Yes.
No immortal will violate this rule.
Right, and there's no mystical reason for this. It's literally just convention. They don't fight each other
everybody,
on holy ground.
regardless of who the immortal is, has a safe place.
On any holy ground.
Any holy ground.
Any holy ground.
And then Connor leaves, or Connor stays.
No, Connor leaves. He gets up and says, you have to leave sometime. Because
Connor says you have to leave sometime.
Because the Kurgan has mentioned that it's they're the last two. Like, Castigar is dead, and so now there is only the Kurgan and Connor left. And so Connor gets up to leave, and he tells the Kurgan, we're gonna duke this out later, because you've got to leave sometime. And then the Kurgan sits back down, and the priest comes and tells him, listen, people are trying to have a moment here.
People are trying to pray here.
People are trying to pray here.
And you're disrupting them.
And you're disrupting them. And so he gets up, pretends to kiss the priest's ring, but just licks his hand.
Licks his hand like in the most disgusting way.
He is committed.
While maintaining eye contact to establish dominance.
So committed to this vibe. I mean, he was like, here I am. I am the Kurgan. The Kurgan doesn't kiss when they can disturb someone to their very core by licking them. In fact, he utilizes his tongue a lot in this role. He sticks his tongue out. He makes weird tongue noises. He licks people. He commits. And on his way out, he says,
I have something to say. It's better to burn out than to fade away.
Oh, he also uses the word effete in this scene.
Oh, yes.
When he is talking to Connor, he says that Ramirez was an effete snob, which I think is a really interesting addition to his overall gruff character.
Right, to imply that the Kurgan is actually very well read and literate.
That he's old and wise.
Right.
That he's not only bloodthirsty and
he's
terrifying.
not only an aggressive, bloodthirsty warrior.
Right.
He's also very, 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 very old and learned.
Yes. Which I thought was really interesting.
Which my interpretation of the quickening was that when you absorbed the person's power, like just their life energy, you also absorbed some of their life experience.
Yes, and this is carried over into the television show because at one point, Duncan, who is the main character of the television show, absorbs a dark quickening where someone is so evil, and like the cumulative nature of this quickening is so evil that when he takes it, when he kills the person and absorbs it, he himself becomes evil. And he actually has to find a way of discharging this dark quickening without passing it on to anyone else. So someone can have a sum of experiences so horrific that they literally corrupt the next person who kills them.
That's a very interesting perspective.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. So after this scene, at some point, the Kurgan gets Brenda.
Well, no, he hasn't even revealed himself to Brenda yet. This is the moment where she shows up and confronts Rachel. And Rachel says, Russell Nash isn't here. She goes, Russell Nash is dead! And slams her hand down on the desk. And that's when he takes her upstairs because he's like, well, shit. She already figured everything out. I might as well just go ahead and stab myself in front of her. That's the next logical course of action here. Just really running with the overall killer vibe that he has with Brenda. He can't flirt to save his life, apparently. And he also can't lie to her. So as soon as she calls him out on his bullshit, he's like, you got me. I'm immortal.
I've been alive for 4.5 centuries. And I cannot die.
Well, everybody's got their problems.
And she's like, you know what? Super hot. And they have an intimate moment. A graphic intimate moment that in parts does not make sense. Which we kind of assumed. He's immortal. He's learned a couple of tricks. You know, he's
a little kinky.
Little kinky, maybe. I don't know. You've been having sex for 450 years. You got to try out new things, right? You can't stick with the same old, so I get it. And then we cut to a zoo scene where they're watching some lions run around in the zoo, which is the saddest lion enclosure I've ever seen. And he actually stares down a lion. And then in the background as they're chatting is the Kurgan.
Oh, yes. They're walking down the sidewalk between the exhibits.
Yes.
And like very well framed. They're on the right side. And then off in the background is the silhouette of the Kurgan.
Yes. And she's like, I think we should be together because you're hot and you're immortal. And I think that's pretty hot. And he's like, look, I know we flirted successfully from his point of view because he got where he wanted to go with this relationship. And I realized that you stabbed me and then we got it on, but it's not going to work. We can't be together because I tried it once. She got old and died. You're probably going to get old and die too. I can't go through that anymore because I'm emotionally sealed myself off to those kind of experiences. So you got to go. And she's like, okay, well, thanks for the memories. And she dips. But the Kurgan, who has watched them, follows her to her apartment. So the very next scene, she's walking up to her apartment with some books, and he appears at the top of the stairs. Oh, that's right.
She's in the stairwell carrying a bunch of books.
She has the option of running down the stairs.
She's one floor. He is one floor up, and he kind of growls at her.
Yes.
And she drops the books. Smart move. She runs to her door and fumbles with her keys. Not smart move.
She could have just run back down the stairs and out into the street.
Right.
But instead she runs into her apartment to get her gun. Because that's what she runs in to get. So she runs and gets her gun. She turns around and points it at him. But he just pushes her hand up and she discharges the weapon above her head. And then we get a repeat of the grandmother car scene.
The joyriding scene.
Yes. And really, there's no plot between here and the end of the movie. The end of the movie is still about half an hour off. But we have tons of car scene. And then we have the longest fight scene of the movie where they truly destroy the roof of the Silver Cup Studios. And they
have about 30 O's in the word long here.
Yes. It's not notable unless you like sword fighting scenes.
The sword fighting scenes here are not particularly nuanced or sophisticated.
Yeah, we're getting early days.
It's very reminiscent of like Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker lightsaber scene.
It's true. What do you know? Castigear's in episode 1.
So they fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. And then they fall through the skylight.
We do get kind of a mirror of Heather running away from Ramirez and the Kurgan because Brenda is trapped on this rooftop and she's trying to escape while the Kurgan and Connor are duking it out. So we get kind of a nice mirror here of the previous fight scene. But it ends much better this time because after they fall through the skylight, they get kind of you get a more upbeat background music. So clearly was losing maybe before, but now he's serious. So somehow Brenda has teleported down into this room with them, even though they had to fall like 2 stories to the floor. But is realism what we're concerned about at this point? I don't think so, because he cuts the Kurgan's head off. A giant tornado of energy.
The cloud
emerges.
finishes Ramirez's cut.
Yes, he finishes Ramirez's cut. He does. He cuts it off. We get a brief kind of creepy smile scene where we're not sure if it was successful. And
Windows
then
explode.
His head slowly peels back.
Oh, yeah.
And then we get kind of a creepy sound because apparently the Kurgan was so evil and so powerful that you don't just get lightning and explosions. Oh no, you get an animated tornado of evil demons.
Yes, like an overlay cartoon animated tornado.
Yes. Sucking itself into Christopher Lambert. And he's making vague, portentous statements like, I know everything. I am everything. Which is apparently the prize because he's the last immortal now.
Hold on. The prize is the first male multiple orgasm.
Yes, because you have been described. You wrote that down in your notes.
That's the end of my notes.
Because
the prize, the first male multiple orgasm.
I mean, it's as accurate as anything else because we don't know what the prize is. Because after that, we cut to a scene where they're hanging out on the Highlands in Scotland. And Brenda goes, so what is the prize? And he goes, yeah, I can hear people's thoughts all over the world and I can change what they're thinking. And she's like,
what am I thinking right now?
What am I thinking right now? And he's like, that you love me? So he's not
You're
even...
wondering if you could love me.
Yes. So
and the answer is yes. I'm the same as you. I'm just a regular person.
Except that I can hear the thoughts of everyone.
Except that if I
world.
try, I can hear people's thoughts all over the world.
And I could start World
Presidents,
War III.
prime
Let me
ministers.
start World War III right now because
whatever.
I could do that. Which is why we didn't want a bad guy to win the prize, right? But we're never going to refer to the prize like this ever again in the subsequent 3 movies and television show that are going to follow this. Television show and spin-off. Yeah, it's not going to... I mean, we're never going to talk about the prize this way again. In fact, any other time we reference the prize, it's going to pretty much just be that they got to become mortal. Because Highlander 2 is not canon.
Highlander 2? What Highlander 2? They made Highlander 1 and then they made Highlander 3, which was a bold choice to not make a Highlander 2.
Right.
But they didn't do it. There was no Highlander 2. What are you talking about?
Yeah, if we could collectively retcon our way out of Highlander 2, we would.
Everybody would.
The only highlight of Highlander 2 is that Ramirez comes back briefly, with no explanation because he's dead.
There's some explanation.
Yeah, they have so much chemistry as friends that he literally summons him back with lightning.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so when we come back in Highlander 3, which is the actual next Highlander movie, he is mortal. Brenda has passed tragically, and he's mortal. And they find another immortal who is trapped in a cave.
But trapped in such a way that
they stayed dead.
Dead in the interim. He was waiting for some rocks to be lifted off of him to revive.
Right. He couldn't revive. So because he was dead, yeah.
As soon as they moved to the rocks, boom, Christopher Lambert's young again.
Yeah. Is he? Is he? Yeah. So, rewatch score. What's your rewatch score?
Oh, this is like an 8, and you can rewatch this movie.
Yeah, I'm there with you. It's like an 8. I clearly watched it a lot because I was quoting it, the movie as we went along, which is why Matt chose to be the narrator. Although I had a very hard time giving up narrator, apparently, because I still talked for 40%. But
my notes were not comprehensive.
Hey, it's your first time, okay? Everybody fumbles a little on their first time. maybe next time you'll get the prize. But Matt mentioned a scene that is an impactful scene earlier on that we didn't cover in depth.
This is during, I just kind of glossed over it as the training montage. But like throughout the rest of the movie, we reference the quickening a few times. And so the quickening is kind of like the way the Kurgan talks about it. The quickening is when you kill another immortal, all of their energy gets transferred to you, increases your power, and that whole experience is the quickening. But during the training montage between Ramirez and Connor McLeod, there's one scene in particular that I thought was really well done, where they're on a beach and Ramirez is explaining to Connor, he says, look at that stag over there. Like, calm yourself and feel its energy, feel its heartbeat, whatever. And I thought Sean Connery's acting, just like, not just the words, but just like his physical movements in that scene were really, really well done. And really conveyed the perspective of like, okay, I'm connecting with this animal and I am now embodying this animal. And then he says, that is the quickening after the whole thing. And so that perception of the quickening as just like the general ability to sense and connect to any life around you is a very different perspective on what is the quickening versus how the Kurgan talks about it.
It's a much more generalized description of the quickening, which makes more sense in this movie because when Ramirez meets Connor and he gets like struck by lightning. He says that you're feeling right now, that's the quickening.
Right. That's your connection to life.
And here forward, we're only going to refer to the quickening as what you get when another immortal dies. Right. But in this movie, the quickening is treated much more as like they can sense life force. And they can sense the life force of other living things. Because he does, in some parts, sense like Brenda is following him and he knows it. Because he can sense her.
Right. He's familiar with her life force.
With her, like, life force. And you can sense the different life force of an immortal versus the life force of
Probably because they're, like, the life force of an immortal would... And the life force of an immortal that has killed other immortals would be massive compared to your average human around you.
Yeah. So... definitely the quickening is treated more as a sense and less of a like event, which it will be here forward. It will always be just described as the quickening when they kill another immortal. But I think in a lot of ways, this movie treats the mythology in the way that you kind of would like to have seen it treated moving forward. Where we leave it.
They don't define everything.
We leave it very open. We leave it very open to interpretation, open to exploration, Whereas moving forward,
like the Force in episodes 4, 5, and 6.
Yes.
Versus
yes.
episodes 1, 2, 3.
Right, where you go from it being this, the Force is literally just the energy created by all living things. And some people are able to manipulate it, and some people aren't. To, it's parasites living in your blood, and it's measurable. And the amount of those parasites living in your blood determines how much force you can use. How force sensitive you are. I mean, that takes the magic out of it. So once we move on to Highlander 3, which is the next movie, and then on to the rest of the television show, it loses a little bit of magic. Although they do explore different things, like if an immortal gets beheaded on accident, where does the quickening go? Because does it have to be a specific immortal that beheads them? For something that is a deceptively simple mythology, there's a lot of questions. And it's interesting. Like, this is something that I loved that they explored so much. And I want this movie rebooted. Like, I don't normally care one way or the other whether we take a movie and remake it or not, because I enjoy the movie as it is. But a deceptively simple mythology like this is something that I would love to see explored again with more modern sensibilities. Because we get a lot of over-the-top, overly complicated, really in-depth. If you haven't watched it from the first season of the first episode, why even bother television shows? And they feel so overwhelming that I want a step back like this, where it's like Sense8. I liked Sense8 because in the very beginning, it feels very simple. They can talk to each other and they can visit each other. And then it builds on itself. And by the time it's built itself up to the complexity you want as a sci-fi fantasy viewer, it's like being in the pot of water as it's heated up to the boil. You don't feel like you're getting dropped in boiling water. You've been along for the ride the whole way. And it's great. And that's, hey, and I want Henry Cavill to be Connor McLeod. Like, he got cast as it. It was under development, and I really hope that his new venture doesn't steer him away from finishing this, because I want to see that movie so bad.
I agree. All right, so that was Highlander, the director's cut, and so now for the end. Aww. The end of our conversation about Highlander. The first movie, and not the second movie, Highlander 3.
Not yet.
What are our awards for this movie?
Okay, well, my award goes to Brenda for the most oddly specific, shoehorned set of specialties of any character in a movie. She gets to not only investigate the murder and be introduced that way, but she's also literally wrote the book on metallurgical history of sword making. And I feel like without her set of specialties, this movie doesn't work. So congratulations, Brenda, for having the exact specialties required to further this plotline.
All right, my award goes to the hot dog stand guy.
Hey, Moran, have you read what it says in here?
You kidding, Tony? You know cops can't read.
What does incompetent mean?
That mayor, he calls me at 2 o'clock in the morning. Man, I don't even answer the phone anymore.
Hey, what does baffled mean?
Who's heckling the police officers, and it's like the cleanest, most, I don't know, comprehensive, but like the most effective heckling of some police officers who have they've already decided who the bad guy is, so they're not even attempting to investigate this murder. And it's just this hot dog stand guy reading the newspaper while these police officers are getting hot dogs. Say, what does incompetent mean? What does bumbling?
Baffled.
Baffled. What
Yes.
does baffled mean? Yeah, I think hot dog stand guy for most effective heckling of incompetent police officers is my award.
Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. You can find us on Instagram at The Strange and Beautiful Book Club. And you can find us on Patreon at The Strange and Beautiful Book Club. So, in the meantime, until we meet again, I'll be announcing what we're going to watch on the Instagram. So if you want to keep up with that, you've got to check us out there. And
that means she hasn't decided yet.
Does not mean I haven't decided yet. It means it's still a mystery. Also, we're reading a book. So in the next couple of weeks, we're hoping to do a book
episode.
Yes,
right?
In the next couple of weeks, we're hoping to do a book review, and we'll have a special guest. And it is going to be of A Court of Thorns and Roses. So if you want to pick up a copy of that and get started reading, I highly suggest it.
Rachel has not stopped reading it all day.
It's research.
Research. Okay.
Research.
She's committed to her research. Remember, sometimes the strangest things are the most beautiful, too.
So be who you are and love what you love. Until next time, friends. Bye.
Bye.
Don't need to hit the table. When you hit the table, it transmits to the microphones.
Okay, I need to put some kind of rubber baffle at the mount.
If you just don't smack the mic or the table, we're fine. Rude.